Hi everyone, my name is Neta Bomani and I'm a zine maker, an educator, and an abolitionist, and also your host tonight for After SASS. We're broadcasting live from Interference Archive in Park Slope in Brooklyn on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape people. And as I said before, we're here with After SASS, an original program of Booklyn Incorporated. Booklyn Incorporated is a nonprofit organization located in the Sunset Park neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and is celebrating 23 years of promoting artist books and zines as primary research materials, curriculum supports, and tools for social justice. For more information, you can check out booklyn.org and connect with us on Instagram at booklynart. So Sass Zines, as many of you may know, was an annual zine fair initiated in 2017 by a small group of talented cartoonists and zine creators of color. This beloved Brooklyn program provided a space for emerging, established, and historically marginalized artists and publishers to exhibit, share, and sell their work. It was presented again in 2018 and then another in 2019. After a 2-year hiatus, we're back. And following this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, this program is emerging with a new name, After SASS, a provocation that reminds us that representation isn't enough. Zines have been a critical tool for creative and political expression among queer, gender variant people of color in print for a long time. Zines are a mechanism for community education and an expression of our personal stakes in taking ownership of our information and knowledge production. They belong to a long history of radical counterculture in print media. To truly support and celebrate each other, we must remember the radical history that zines makes zines possible and sharpen our political analysis and revive the rigor from which we approach the community care that sustains our zine making practices. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Interference Archive for welcoming this program into their space. Interference Archive is an all-volunteer run, nonprofit organization that explores the relationship between culture production and social movements through its OpenStax archival collection. Check out their website for open hours and upcoming events at interferencearchive.org. I'd also like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the NYC Council, whose support has made this program possible. So I'm really, really excited tonight to bring you two amazing people from the Bluestockings Cooperative. And I just want to get started by giving you both a chance to introduce yourselves. Like, tell us who you are, what your names are, what your pronouns are, and maybe just a little bit about the Bluestockings Cooperative.
Yeah. So glad to be here. Hey, I'm Joan. I'm Joan Zahra Dark. I use they, them pronouns. I'm one of the worker owners of Bluestockings Cooperative. I've been with the co-op for a little over 4 years now. It does not feel like a long time in the span of like a co-op that's like, I guess about as old as Booklyn Art, like 23 years now or so. But I guess it's 4 years is definitely the longest job I've ever had. I work on a lot of stuff relating to comics and zines, and I'm really excited to be here.
Hi, Joan.
Hi, I'm Jay. I use all pronouns. I'm also one of the worker owners at Bluestockings Cooperative. I started right before the pandemic and was able to help out a little bit during the pandemic. And I joined the co-op after it was formed as a cooperative about a year ago. I help out with some of the fundraising, finances, trying to figure out community relationships, how we can be a source for our neighbors, and grants, and just trying to really be a presence and occupy space in the Lower East Side. And thank you for having us here.
Yay, I'm so excited. So as you both know, you were both invited here to Interference Archive to bring some zines from your personal archives and collections, and also come and browse the archive and select a few things. So I'm kind of curious, what did you bring with you today?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, or should I?
Yeah, I can go first.
Go for it.
So the first one I brought is The City in the Forest. It's a contemporary, it's about the work that folks in Atlanta are doing to protect the forest that is Actually, they're trying to raise it down for a police compound. And it's a very detailed narration of how they are sort of resisting police state. And for me, zines, because it's a zine fair, I think for me, zines are a way to communicate these strategies in very minute detail, and share very real-time sort of developments that happen. And especially when we are living in surveillance capitalism, this sort of information, it gets tricky to share. So I think zines are a really great way to share these sort of understandings.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Can you share a little bit about like the authors and just like in general what this zine looks like and feels like?
Yeah, it's the authors. I think the different author, as they're engaging with different parts of this sort of resistance, they narrate different parts as their engagement calls for it. I think one of my favorite parts is like the timeline in there. I think just how things how quickly things happen and how they react to it. I think it's really illuminating to see thought processes that like organizations and current groups and collectives that are resisting the police state and how they think through things is really fascinating, and how they react to context. And there's not like a one standard answer to things. It's like going through the process. And I think this scene about like transparency and radical action sort of, which I also brought because I think it was a good companion, because it's this constant process of evaluating where we are, what we're standing for, and what our goals are. And yeah, I think that scene really sort of empowers you to think in very strategic ways.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to the next scene, but I'm just like, taking a look at this now. It's a pretty classic, black and white zine. It's got this like very thick green construction or cardstock paper type cover. It's typeset in like very, very, very like simple like serif fonts. And like you said, it has a timeline. It's sort of like organized very linearly in terms of like the context of Atlanta and the general, sort of resistance surrounding this like forest crisis, right? So I just wanted to amplify some of the photography in here as well. There's some beautiful photos from demonstrations. There's also photos from the forest. And then we have this like timeline of events as you were outlining earlier. It's really a beautiful zine, and it's like there's no frills, right? There's like no binding. It's very easy to transport. It's very easy to like copy and make a bunch of copies. So this is a really, really, really excellent pick. Thanks for bringing this in. Yeah. And let's take a look at the other one you mentioned, the radical accountability.
Yeah, this one, I think it helps also as a cooperative, because I think this one is just like how to like sort of engage with other people who, and we're humans. We have different personalities. We have different ways to like that we operate in the world, different things that upset us, how we react to them. So I think this is just like, these things happen, and it's like we're not going to shun them out. We're just going to figure out ways to like work with each other. And this like accountability and transparency and making and like towards action, where we all do it together. And I think it's just really I really enjoy that scene, and it helps to like see people and people you work with as humans.
Yeah, this one has a completely different feel. I think I'm familiar with this collective, Gender Feel.
Yeah.
They make some pretty like, I would say, beautiful zines. Like the paper is not just any kind of like photocopy paper, right? It's like it's got this like natural grain kind of like speckled texture. The fonts are very, very custom. I think this is like the Gender Feel font, so to speak. I'm not sure what it's called. But it's very iconic in terms of just like the Gender Feel like look and feel and aesthetic. And in general, this is just a smaller kind of like pocket kind of zine, right? So it's like something that you could probably fit in the back of like some Carhartt jeans on your way to like on the way to a demonstration, or like to get coffee, or like go to the park or something like that. So it's very much so like it has a different kind of like weight and feel to it when you hold it in your hands. Another really beautiful zine. And it has a Bluestockings stamp on it. So it looks like you stock this at the bookstore, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think there's a book in the store that's like just from Gendervale that's like their own typography, just like a history of their own of just this font too. Just like that like specific style, which I love. Like I'll talk about in a minute, but like love that like granular type of like getting into specifics with zines like that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I think even the cover is like, it looks like it's printed on a risograph machine. It's like this gold metallic ink on this like off-white, you know, cardstock paper as well. So it's a very beautiful zine. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Joan? What did you bring?
Yeah. I'm very glad I decided to bring two because I was trying to decide between them so I could talk about both. I picked, I think both of these are very kind of like autobio or like perzine, depending on your like nomenclature. I guess the first one I'll talk about is...
Let's actually slow down for a second. What's a perzine or an autobiozine?
Yeah, sure. Very good point. Yeah, so I guess depending on if you're, you know, working from a comics or zine perspective, right? Like autobio or for an autobiographical comic, or perzine, standing for like a personal zine, is usually like a type of format, right? Where folks are specifically talking about their own life stories, or, you know, they're like, you know, memoirizing, you know, their work, whether it's like to talk about a specific point or just to like relay some experiences that they've had for folks to share. And yeah, I think it's a very cool format, especially because, like, you know, it's also talking about like how we think about memory, how we remember things, right? Like the structure of memoir. I think it's real cool.
And also like how we construct our own individual like identities and like navigate how we want to express ourselves, right? Like this kind of like publicizing of like an interior personal narrative is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like it a lot. So I have two different comics / zines in that style that I really love. This one is a collection of a few stories from Bianca Eunice, Say Her Name and Other Stories. I'm not sure if Bianca is still making it, but it's just Bianca Eunice is a Black cartoonist and zine maker from Chicago, and there's a few stories in there talking about Blackness and queerness. You know, there's a story about you know, dealing with police, dealing with you know, racist Halloween stories, and I don't know, I like one of the things that I especially like about autobio stuff, because I mean, all media is like capturing a moment, right? But I feel like especially with personal zines, it's, you know, you're being very honest about the specific moment that this is capturing in someone's life or in history that they're experiencing, and that likely a lot of other people have experienced in some shape or form. And I think that's you know, it's a really good way to connect with people.
Yeah, I love this illustration style. I mean, it's like it looks like it's, you know, this, how would you describe how this paper feels? Like it's kind of like semi-glossy.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a spot gloss on there, I think, maybe.
And then it's like, it has this kind of, it's offset printed, but it has the kind of like aesthetics of like risograph printing with like the dual colors. As you know, there's some colors in blue here. It's like black and white, but also has these like blue moments, also these orange moments. It's very gorgeous, this scene. And the illustrations are, you know, kind of like cute and humorous, but also the content is like, you know, it's deeply personal and also like deeply related to like socio-political struggles as well.
Yeah, I think all those stories originally, it's like collected stuff that originally published in the Nib also. And it's just like, yeah, stuff that comes together. So like definitely has that kind of like serialized style to it, where it's like very minimal, but what substance you do have is very, it stands out.
Are there any excerpts from this comic that you'd like to read with us today?
Ooh,
like take a look.
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to find some of these. I don't know if I'm the best person to be sharing them.
That's fair.
Yeah. I might go.
Prefer to read an excerpt from the next one? Yeah, let's dive into the next one.
Yeah. The next one, which is very, very different in what it's talking about, is it's Napkin by Carta Munir. Carta is a trans cartoonist, a trans woman of color cartoonist based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and puts out a bunch of stuff. This is part of her press, Diskette Press, and the whole thing is just a very, very thick little zine where it's talking about her experiences around sex and sexuality, and what that was like for her before transitioning and after. But also, it's a collection of these cards that Carta gave out after having sex with people.
Wow.
And basically just says, for folks who can't see it.
This would be a good one to read.
It's really wonderful. Yeah.
Can I read it?
Yeah, please.
It says, "Thank you for having sex with Carta Munir. Please take a moment to fill out this card. Was this your first time having sex with Carta? Yes or no? Yes is circled. Is Carta the first trans woman you slept with? Yes or no? No is circled. Did you have an orgasm? Yes or no? Yes is circled. Would you have sex with Carta again? Yes or no? Yes is circled. Do you consider yourself a top, verse, or bottom? Verse is circled. What is your gender identity? Blank field, filled in, says non-binary. How old are you? Blank field says 25. And then it says at the bottom in small fine print, please write any additional comments on the back of this card.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of those in the zine, along with like Carta's own personal writing as well. And so, I think there's a point in there where she talks about, not just wanting to have her experience as the only one that's involved, as a way of like having the cards to like have people who are, also like in her life, like, talking about their perspective of her sexuality as well. And so I think it's a really beautifully intimate piece about transsexuality and what it means to be a trans person interacting with other people in the world.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this in, because I think it just shows the versatility of zines. We have like, the zine that Jay brought in, which is very much so like a standard 8.5 by 11 piece of paper folded in half, and it's very like no frills, easy to distribute. Then you have this like, this zine that's very custom and very has a lot of like, craft and like artistry that goes into it. It's thick like a napkin or like a stack of napkins. It sort of like has this kind of like, risograph cover on the top here, and then inside is just, as like the format is very much so playing with the book form itself. And I think that, zines can look like this, and zines can also look like this, and they're both very, very much so pieces of art. And I think that, I'm really glad that you brought this in to show like the range of like play and like seriousness that zines can take.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Wow. What should we talk about next?
That's a good question.
Jay, did you get to all your zines that you brought in?
I wasn't sure when you meant personal, like my personal, or like Bluestockings person, like, or as a cooperative personal. So I brought like a couple from my personal, and then I was like, oh, let me, and you know, it's like, oh, the Bluestockings also. We have unfortunately Emily High. She couldn't be here, the zine coordinator, but yeah, they do a great job of selecting zines. So I had a really hard time. So but yeah, I brought one because I just survived and punished. I think they do great work, and for me, I brought it personally because poetry for me is difficult. But I love this one because they kind of like just collate all the poets that they kind of curated for me, and I just I really like that because yeah, I find it hard to get into poetry when it's, I guess, maybe just by one author or maybe even anthologies. But I found this like sort of because it's by Survived and Punished, there's like framework, and I just it was really beautiful. It's just really beautiful poetry. So yeah, I think on all my zines I have this like thing where I think there's something very intimate about zines where I think the intimacy was really felt in this poetry. So it's like that the poetry combined with the intimacy of a zine with this one, it was just beautiful and very touching. So yeah, I think and then I brought this one. I'm just because
can we see this cover?
Yeah.
What's going on in this cover?
It's very important.
Gossip Haraway, Volume 1. I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess. XOXO. We're talking about whole new forms of subjectivity in here. What's this one about?
So it's on the last page. It does say that these are all quotes from Haraway, who I love their ideas, but I find it very hard to kind of read. It's very dense.
Can we slow down there? Who is Donna Haraway?
Oh, so they're a theorist. What I like to think of a theorist, they talk about technology, cyborg, environment, species on these very meta topics that I feel like. And yeah, I think they're a theorist. Labels are difficult for me, but in philosophy. So and I'm also interested in ecology and how as all these sentient beings we sort of interact. So Donna Haraway talks about that, but it's very dense, and I love that this zinester sort of like integrated the current memes with direct quotations from Haraway to kind of like really just it's like a very potent sort of mix that kind of just shares their idea to the masses because their ideas are sort of hard to sometimes consume.
And are these all screen grabs from Gossip Girl?
I think they're supposed to be.
I think they are. That's what it looks like to me. So it looks like this zine creator has taken the works of various quotes from Donna Haraway's work. I think the main one that's primarily cited here is the Cyborg Manifesto, which is one of Donna Haraway's most popular pieces of writing, and just like slap them on in this like I think the original meme format, which is like this like white black outline like impact font in all caps, and just like posted these quotes on these memes, which is like really, really, really hilarious. There's one here that reads, "We have an obligation to learn from dogs," and I believe that is the dog from Gossip Girl. And then you have another one here that says, "Vision is always a question of the power to see," and that's Blair from Gossip Girl with cucumber facial. So definitely hilarious, but also again like playing with this like seriousness of like critical theory and like sci-fi kind of like aesthetics and like just like general like ideas of like futurism with this like playful kind of like joking online sort of like culture and like meme aesthetics here. So that's really cool. I love that. This is from your personal collection?
No, this is from Bluestockings.
This is from Bluestockings Collection. Okay, okay,
Wow.
I see the stamp. Yes, cool. Shout out to Illbred Aunt Press. I think that this is an amazing zine. What else should we look at today?
I know we have a few things from the interference archive.
Okay, yeah, let's look at what you pulled from the archives here.
you want to go, Joan?
Yeah. I because of course one of the first things I found was a road trip zine. I pulled 456 hours notes from the end of an endless road. Again, in the very much in the kind of theme of all other stuff that I'm bringing. It looks like the folks here were doing travel across North America in 2011. So there's stuff basically cut into snippets from New York City to Seattle to, just all sorts of different stuff here. There's like different screen. I was about to say screen grabs. From the the New York City website. Stuff from like photos of New York and Seattle and different parts of North America, and talking about autobio, I feel like again, a road trip zine is like it's capturing a specific moment. It's like taking in so much of what we are personally experiencing, and like stuff that otherwise might not get captured in like a mainstream publication. You have zines that are just completely uninhibited. They are very much stream of consciousness, whatever someone wants to put out there, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the things that I really love about zines is that you don't like, a lot of people think that in order to write anything you have to have some kind of like large extensive knowledge bank or like certain kind of credentials or educational status, but really if you're a person and you have experiences and you've gone through things, you can write a zine. And that's what's really cool about the kind of like per zine or like the autobiographical zine, is that your experiences are enough, and you can go on a trip with friends and turn that into a zine, and that's really cool. You can walk around a city and you can photograph that city and you can turn that into a zine, and that doesn't require any kind of degreed or credentialed or institutional sort of like background. So that's really, really cool. Did you have any familiarity with this author or this work, or did you just pull something at random?
I think it just spoke to me just at random. It looks like I saw from the back that it's like the folks at Occupied London. It looks like put this one out, which I think I've seen their stuff in passing before, but like I can't say I'm like super familiar. It's just one of the first things that stuck out to me.
I can see why. It's a gorgeous scene. It's like, I don't know what this texture on this like sort of like soft, hard like cover is, but it's very grainy. It's very gritty. It's kind of got like the title here is kind of like sunken into the cover, and then the text is like this like beautiful serif text, and it's very like, I don't know what I would describe this mood. I guess it's kind of like melancholic, and yeah, just like, obviously this person has very, very strong like design sensibilities and like photo sensibilities, and it's really like shining through in this scene here. Really excellent choice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You, Jay.
Yeah, speaking on just like anybody can make a zine, this one spoke out to me because it's a Lego club, and then I opened it and like it's just a bunch of like Legos. I mean, but yeah, it's a child and a guardian sort of creating on the scene. But like I think to me that's what zines are. They're for everybody. It's kind of what I just want to what y'all said, that if you're human who has experiences, like you can do a zine, which is like what I love, because I'll like collect random things, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And it's like, doesn't matter, I'll turn it into a zine someday. And yeah, so I that really spoke to me, that it doesn't have to be super, you don't need a degree or anything. Whatever you just said, it's like, yes, that's exactly how I felt about this one.
I love these drawings. I mean, this is Aubrey's Lego zine. I mean, Lego Club zine number one. So there are probably other issues. Shout out to Aubrey in Portland, Oregon. And there are a series of, you know, little captions and also just like drawings associated with various photographs and illustrations here. And I especially love this page because it's Aubrey's drawing, I think, of their house and them and their Legos, and just this incoherent babble of letters and symbols and icons explaining the picture, which I think explains it very well.
Me too, Audrey. Me too.
Right. Just like, you know, zines don't have to be legible. They don't have to make sense. And this is the perfect example of that. I think this is a beautiful zine. And again, shows the kind of like simplicity of zines, which is really cool. This page says Transformer Man. There's a picture of a young child and a Transformer Lego sculpture, and the child has their head resting on their palm, and it says, "Powers, when he shouts, he turns into a spaceship. His partner is a witch. He can jump up to a roof and punch it open. Because he's so strong, he can chop down the most strongest things in the world. The world's. He is 11 years old. He can climb trees as good as me. He can super breathe. He has ice breath. When he writes notes to his friends, he always tells them what he can do. Everyone thinks that he is a superhero." Beautiful. I love this one.
Incredible.
Excellent choice. What else we got?
And then this one I actually the bread and puppet part of the zine, and it goes in. I like this one because it talks about language, which I find, as you know, as like working at a bookstore, like language is fascinating and how we communicate, and also graphic language. I didn't get to read it, but I wanted to, so I picked it out because I think it's sort of I think it's talking about art. Okay, I think it's, I guess puppets are kind of like the silence sort of, and then just like saying, I think it's playing on language and that, but I guess it's more theoretical, but I think that's one thing about zines is that you can have, I think, like little thoughts, which are not a book or anything, but like you just have these like dense thoughts, and you're like, I just need to get this out there, and it's like on one, it could be like on one word, which is like silence and language. What is that? And just like exploring these sort of concepts and how they inform art and how they inform a lot of things. So, and yeah, I mean, it's bread and puppet, like, so yeah, this one really stood out to me, and it was really nice to see that y'all have it in your archives.
Let's take a look at the cover. Yeah, it says The Old Art of Puppetry in the New World Order, a lecture with fiddle by R. Schumann, Bread and Puppet, 1993. I'm sensing a theme here, Jay. You are very, very, very drawn to green. Lots of green zines here today. But yeah, the illustrations in this are really, really good. I'm really feeling this. Cool. Anything else you want to highlight?
I feel like it's kind of similar to what I had, you know, they all have a theme. I think I do want to highlight, I guess, the more contemporary and like very local, which was the Interference had accessible, which is the frack out of Brooklyn sort of thing, which is kind of also kind of not exactly, but you know, like just overall all these communities fighting against these fossil fuel industry, which drives everything. So yeah, I think that really stood out to me, that and I think that we all all over are kind of resisting similar things, and this one definitely caught my eye because like, oh, I want to go through it because yeah, I have not really been engaged with it, even though it is in my city, so which is like, you know. But yeah, that's why zines are great, because they make things accessible and not so overwhelming. They like nicely yeah, it's one of the things that I struggle with now. It's like, how do you consume news and things like that? I think zines are a great way because it's like the folks kind of just like lay it out for you and you're like, thank you. So
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, just to hear your reflections, like, from the two of you. Like, how do you define a zine today? Like, what are the kind of characteristics or qualities, and yeah, how would you define a zine?
Yeah, that is a good question, because I feel like, as we've sort of kind of illustrated, there's so many different ways that a zine can look, and like, you even have like very detailed zine presses who are putting out like, risograph stuff that you can, with like very like glossy layouts and very beautiful work. And it's like, not to say that that isn't a zine, because I think it is. I think it just shows the range that you can pull from in that kind of work. I think the thing that strikes me the most when I think of zines is just a like an independent or like an uninhibited kind of voice that's coming through, as opposed to traditional publishing or traditional outlets where you have to get a filter through, you have to get an editor or like someone else to sign off on what you're putting out there. It is very much a person or a group of people's voices that are looking to put this out there, and specifically to capture, like Jay was saying, if you're like trying to capture very specific details of movement work, or like very specific like practices to like educate folks. Like, I think just independent or spirit is definitely how I like try to think of it a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really cohesive like definition of what a zine is. It's like, it's really about amplifying this kind of like, this sense or this feeling, this urge to like do something yourself, like you're not waiting for permission, you're not waiting to get a grant, you're not waiting for X milestone to happen in order to make something and see something in the world. That a person or a collective is like sort of activated to make something and get the word out there. And kind of print medium such as like a zine is like a perfect, quick, accessible, affordable way to just like get that word out there really quickly, right? So I really like that definition. And I'm curious about you, Jay, and like how you're sort of like, you've sort of alluded to it earlier, a lot in your examples, but I'm wondering what your reflections are now.
Yeah, I think Joan's. I think the word that stood out was uninhibited.
Yes,
which is like exactly what I mean. This I was like, oh, it's like it can be uncompromising, because it's like, yeah, it's out there. It doesn't like it's not about any sort of like exchange or monetary exchange. It's about like, I want to share what's going on in my or our heads. And then I didn't bring the zine, but one of the zines that what happened, like there was a collective that talked me about patriarchy on the left, and then they have like multiple issues, or like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on, I think it was in the 4th or 5th issue, they decided to like separate and have their own zines, because now there's like differences
discord within the collective.
And I find that very like to see that process, and because it is so uninhibited, and they're just like maybe this ethos of like, this is what it is. I like really I appreciate that with zine making, where it can be just like, you get to just have this like sense of vulnerability sometimes, if you so choose, which like, yeah, when you have to worry about publishing and like marketability and things like that may get filtered out.
So yeah, so it's a lot more transparent in terms of like the process and the underlying structures and like the kind of thinking that is like undergirding or otherwise like necessitating this like print object, right? Like, it's not just the object itself existing in the world. It's like the process that goes into like making it that is very much so like apparent. Like when we look at these zines, we see that, you know, you can kind of deconstruct it and see that, oh, it's a piece of paper like folded in half, and sometimes it's stapled or sometimes it's stitched together. Like it's very clear like what's happening, and there's not a lot of like obfuscation or like, you know, polishing in the kind of like standard zine that we might think about, which is like, yeah, I think exactly what you're saying in terms of that vulnerability and that transparency. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated you kind of like describing, because like that was not something I was doing. I realized but then like, yeah, obviously there's a difference between like napkins and, you know,
Yes.
the city and the forest, because I'm like, oh yeah, like that's totally subconscious now, but as you're reading you kind of get it, like their intentions are very clear about what, so yeah, and you know, yeah, it's really nice to have that variety.
Yes. And so how are y'all sort of like thinking about zines and the work that you're doing at Bluestockings Cooperative? I recently have heard, I haven't been there yet, but I want to go soon, that you have a free store with Project Nia. Can you share about that?
Yeah. Do you want to?
You go ahead and
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it definitely plays a role, right? I mean, it's been really cool to you know, do that work with Project Nia and Miriam Kaba to you know, I mean, we had the free store shelves that have been running mostly since we opened reopened in April of last year, and you know, have been relying on donations to keep them running and help out unhoused folks when we can. But you know, with donations, sometimes, you know, you can get a surplus of stuff, and sometimes you only get a little bit. And I think having this concentrated effort help folks who are recently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, who, you know, need support, and unhoused folks to get what they need, whether it's like food or hygiene supplies, emergency kits, whatever. It's really, really important. And I think, you know, in the same way that zines are really speaking out about things that people aren't really speaking about. I think it's about doing the work that other people aren't doing, you know, where it's, you know, the city and the state really don't want to tackle the problems facing incarcerated and unhoused folks who are struggling right now, and you know, like can't afford food, can't afford housing, you know, which is not far away for so many of us, you know. Like I feel like people maybe overestimate how, you know, so many of us are like a paycheck away from that happening. And so trying to act with as much compassion as possible and doing that work for those folks is really important, because, you know, who else is going to?
Right, exactly. And how can people donate or otherwise amplify and share this project?
Yeah, we have a wish list going. That's if you're following us or Project Nia, you'll see it get shared out to you know, help stock the shelves and help you know, support the folks that were helping the communities and stuff. I think that's the biggest stuff. And, you know, if you can't donate yourself, just boosting the wish list, I think, you know, it helps out a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely add that in our chat so that people can check that out. I'm also curious, just in general, you know, Jay, earlier you were talking about like the recent shift that Bluestockings has made to become a cooperative. Can you share more about, you know, your community organizing, your collective, and, you know, how things are going with that?
Yeah, I think it's been a very, for me personally, a great process, because it's really nice to have sort of no bosses, and having
say that again,
no
bosses.
and yeah, it's really nice to have that sort of control over time, and yeah, I think to build collectively
Mhm.
towards in the spirit of like free sharing, free ideas. We talk about what we don't agree with, and so that's been like so fulfilling. Even when like obviously there's compromises and I don't get my and I don't want to get my way all the time because I'm not right all the time.
Mhm.
And I learned so much from like how other people think, and it's like the process of how other people think like enrich my own ways of thinking, gives me better frameworks to think through. Um, and it's been so fulfilling. And I think with and with Project Nia and things, I just also want to say that it's the mutual aid is so critical, and what I've been very privileged and like I don't know, just blessed, or like I don't know the word for it, but like what has really sort of penetrated in my psyche is that you can see the difference when we are able to consistently stock and offer just basic things like basic food and just grooming supplies. You can see that there's a shift in how the folks behave. They they're able to communicate effectively. They're able to just like live their lives without in this like constant like state of precarity and like where am I going to go? And there's just like they're able to relax. They're able to like be humans and exist in the world, and just like just basic things make such a difference. Which is like more fun, like which is why it's when the state and the city have so much resources, they don't provide these basic things. But yeah, we can do it. I mean, we'll keep working at it. We've started to get more grants and things like that. But yeah, we would really like to like sort of keep expanding. I know that in Lower East Side and East Village, there's a lot of other mutual aid groups who do a lot of great work, and yeah, it would be great to keep kind of expanding on these community partnerships um, and also like the zine element. I know that when you have a space that like people don't have to feel like they need to spend money to be in the space, and they can come and like, and the zines are a very accessible way. I think a lot of those folks are gravitated towards the zines, and I know that one person was like, oh, like I didn't know you could do this, and then I showed them a YouTube tutorial where you can just like create, like use that 8x8 11, and kind of you can create your own zines, and I gave them paper. And I think zines are, once it's kind of like mental block where they're shunned from so many places, and then they start to come in, and then I think zines are a great like sort of like introductory to like larger world of text and like and books and things like that. So yeah, I think zines are great in that way.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like, would y'all mind reflecting on, some of your first experiences with zines? Like, were you like, I don't know, I feel like we're similar ages, but I don't know. I don't want to assume. Like, were y'all on Tumblr reading zines and like downloading zines, or are you like more recently like into zines? Like, what's your sort of background with zines?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely come from, I think the common background definitely is what it's definitely what drew me to zines in the first place. I have been going to conventions for as long as I can remember, and going to New York Comic Con and going down Artist Alley and like just seeing all the stuff that folks are putting out, and you get to see everyone's like traditional work and like all the regular comics and stuff that folks can see, but then there's all of the artists who are putting out their own zines and putting out their own work that is completely different than anything that you would find in a regular store. Long before I knew that Bluestockings was carrying zines, I was able to find stuff from those artists and cartoonists that were putting out their own work, and following those folks, and then figuring out, oh, there's a whole community of folks who are making comics and like putting them out online and all that stuff. And the indie comic scene, I think, is really wonderful. It's for that kind of stuff, and really like championing the zine as something to just put out whatever you want.
Didn't Bluestockings just host its own comic zine fair type thing?
We did just do, we just ran our own digital comics fest this last week of May. I was really happy to put that together, especially as so many conventions are going back to in-person events and not necessarily considering the effects that may have on their artists or attendees, and kind of just doing that anyway. It felt really good to do this digital fest, where it was very, low barrier to entry, right? Like, everyone kept, whatever sales they made, they kept 80% of whatever they
Amazing.
made, right? Folks who had never been part of a fest before, got to be part of that for the first time and, meet new artists and discover new work. And that I'm so glad that we got to do that.
Amazing. Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like there was a question.
No, there was definitely a tangent. I definitely went on a tangent asking that question, but the sort of like original question was like, what was your background with zines? Like, how did you first get introduced to the zine making or zine consumption world?
Yeah. I feel like I did mine.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I didn't really. So I would go to like workshops and like talks, and then they would have these little pamphlets, which we can also call zines. So yeah, and I think that was I would collect them, and I think they sort of like, when you go to these things, there's just so many ideas and things like flurrying around. So it was like really nice to have something to go back to. So that was like sort of how I approached it, just like going places and like collecting things, and then sort of like, this distilled where I was and what I was doing. And then once I got to Bluestockings, there's a whole world. There's like a whole world which I'm still exploring now. And I think which is like the Perzines and things. I've never really like read it or engaged with it. But why not? I don't know why not, because I just like it hasn't shown up in that, but it's like going back to like what I was saying, like I'll collect random things. I'm like, I don't know I have no idea why I'm doing this, but like I'm gonna keep it. But it's like, oh, maybe like this is the format for it, right? Like I was subconsciously like sort of doing these things, and it's like, oh, zine is that sort of very personal sort of thing that comes together, and like seeing examples of that has been great.
Yeah, I think collectors and zines are kind of like, doing a handshake. That's like, zines are a perfect thing to collect. They're perfect things to just sort of like, I have thousands of zines in my own personal like home library. Many of them I've read, but also some, it's just like eventually like I'll return to them, or maybe they'll pop up randomly, or maybe I'll give them away. It's this idea that they're things, there's these objects that we can return to and revisit at any point in time, and that they hold a kind of like archive. They're an archive in and of themselves, right? Like they hold this like memory of like an event or like a festival or like a fair, like a personal narrative, a story, a movement. Like that's the way that I like to think of them, these tiny little archives within archives. So yeah, really beautiful reflections on just like how zines have shown up in your lives. Wow.
Yeah.
So what brought you to zines?
Oh, this is such an emotional question for me. I feel like I really got into zines like around like when I was in undergrad. Like I think many people can relate to this sort of like experience of having a kind of like subpar undergraduate education and seeking intellectual rigor and study like outside of the university. And so that was sort of my journey in terms of just like finding zines through that way. I was very much so like online and on Tumblr, and I would follow like zine blogs and zine archives. And then I'm from Austin. I lived there before I lived in New York, and I started volunteering at a very similar space like Bluestockings. It was not for profit. It was collectively run and like cooperatively sort of organized, called Monkey Wrench Books. And we had, when I was a member, we had a very extensive like zine library. It's still ongoing today, and volunteers are still maintaining it. But when I, started volunteering there, it was like, oh, I'll start off with like the Tuesday shift. And then by the end of the week, I realized I've been there every day because I just like going to this community space where like you can read and like encounter of varying degrees of like, ideas. Like I started reading about Afro-pessimism at Monkey Wrench, and started reading about affect theory and like, just like different types, like polyamory and like queer studies and all different types of things that people were writing about in zines in very, it's kind of like a buzzword now, but like very accessible, like very legible ways to me. But also, again, citing these like academic texts and other sort of like theorists and thinkers. And so I just would spend a lot of time in the zine archive. I started printing and making zines and like stocking our zine archive with like zines I found on Tumblr and other zine blogs. And ever since then, I just like can't stop making and interacting with zines. Like I love zines. Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely stop by. The way you describe that space,
yeah, I've been to Bluestockings. Yeah, I've been to Bluestockings many times, and I love Bluestockings. Oh, we have a question from a person named Angie. Angie's asking if anyone has recommendations. I'd love to hear more about the how-to of creating free or accessible community spaces and resources, and about navigating the difficulties of funding, organizing, etc. Ooh, big question. Maybe does somebody want to tackle like the recommendations about the how-tos of creating free, accessible community spaces?
Yeah, that is it's a very good question, because I think it's a tough one, because I feel like, it's all of the accessible spaces that are out there, like Bluestockings included, and I think, like we're certainly not alone in this, but many of them either rely on, if not unpaid labor, like, it's sort of the, beleaguered labor of so many people who are, doing that work specifically to make those spaces free and accessible.
Yes.
And so I think, it is, I think it's a combination of things depending on what you want to, sort of do with a free and accessible space, right? Like, I think, in theory, it's as easy as, getting a bunch of supplies together and going to your local park and saying, I have stuff to distribute, if anyone needs, menstrual products or like food or whatever, sometimes that's how a mutual aid group starts, or like, community spaces, I think, can come in all shapes and forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a physical building even, but yeah, I hope that kind of answered some of that. I know it's not the easiest thing to do. It requires, unfortunately, sometimes you have to have some access and some, like funding. Not always, but I think it definitely requires a little bit of like a boost sometimes to like whether it's money or labor to put that stuff out there.
And I think to just put a kind of like positive spin on that is that you can start with what you have, right? Like all of us have things that maybe somebody else doesn't have and might need. And so it's like, start with what you have, talk to people, like start by talking to your friends and see what you have that they might need. And if you're looking to start a kind of like community space, I think starting with friends is like a good place to start, and not just any friends, you know, like friends that you can be in conflict with and you have good conflict resolution skills with.
Big thumbs up.
Because
Yeah.
that's like at the core of like any kind of like space organizing, is that you need to be with people that you feel safe to move through conflict with. And then once you're able to do that, you can do things like distribute resources and like identify needs and then distribute resources again, you know, like it's this kind of like process of like trial and error and assessing what people need, what the conflicts are, and trying to solve them together with at least one friend, just at least one other person to do something with. Yeah, I'm curious, Jay, what you think about this question.
Yeah, I think what both of you, I think I was gonna say, like, yeah, trying to find people who are trying to do the same things. Like, you know, so if your aim is to form a community, then it's kind of what Joan said. Is it like an actual community that's there all the time, like a physical space, or is it like you go to the park, like a lot of mutual aid groups, and then you distribute items, or you know, what is the community for? I think it's good to have like an aim or a purpose, and like something that really dictates action. So you're like, you know exactly, or like a few actions that you have to do. I think that helps. And then folks that you know that you could do it with, or one person that you can do it with, and definitely someone who you can be in conflict with and constructively. And then yeah, like as far as occupying the space all the time and having that is, you know, in the system we live in, it just requires like a lot of capital and access to capital and resources. So that, depending on where you are, the community gardens in New York City are also very kind of, they will, you know, talk to them. At least in East Village, they're like, yes, please use our space. They want you to use their space. And you know, and then even in just, yeah, see what community groups are already out there, talk to them, and maybe they know who to, like, maybe they won't be able to support you, but maybe they know, like, hey, you should talk to these people. Or so I think even in New York City, if you're new or if you're like transplanting and don't know anyone, it might be hard to find communities or people. So yeah, going to like local groups and just like talking about what you want to do is just so they can connect to you helps. So yeah.
Yeah, you really summed it up. I mean, I think you were channeling Miriam there a little bit about like working from where you're at, you know, is like, yeah, is a big one.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Angie. I hope we answered it. Ooh.
Yeah.
Are there any other things from the archive that we want to talk about? Or not from the archive, things that you brought? Maybe we'll do a little impromptu reading. What are y'all feeling like doing?
I should have gotten more things from the archive.
Yeah, I really like the poems.
Can you read us maybe a poem or two?
Let's see. Yeah, I guess like.
And this is from the Lifeline zine.
Lifeline, a publication of Survived and Punished New York.
So this is by Adrienne Rich, excerpted from Natural Resources, The Dream of a Common Language. The poem is, my heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. The flavor of life is love. The salt of life is also love.
I love that illustration.
Yeah.
From Jane Ball. It's just really beautiful.
Yeah, let's take a look. This illustration right here on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. It's looks like a person who's got their head cradled in both of their palms, and their hair is like covering their face and most of their body. Beautiful illustration. Yeah, this is like a really gorgeous zine too. I think Survived and Punished like really has like a solid format for releasing so many necessary publications, but also expanding like the works of poets and artists, whether they're incarcerated or not. Like I think I'm always in awe of the work that Survived and Punished is doing. So this is a really excellent find. Gorgeous.
It's kind of like like woodcut almost on
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it might be like a woodblock print.
Mm-hmm.
And there's these like kind of like watercolor. I think they're birds. I don't know. They're like abstract little glyphs.
Mm-hmm.
There's on page 15, there's an excerpt from Arundhati Roy from War Talk that says, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." Oh, this is one of my favorite Marian Caldwell quotes. "Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair." Yeah, this is a cross stitch by Maddie Lubert. Beautiful.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for bringing this in, Jared.
I have a question for y'all.
Okay.
Because Jay, you kind of touched on it, and I had me thinking about like sort of the zine as like kind of the evolution of like the workers' pamphlet almost, like sort of like disseminating materials like that. Especially I'm thinking about like, you know, how like IWW stuff that like, you know, used to get put out there, and sort of like the zine as an informational tool. Like I wonder about like y'all's thoughts on zines as like, especially as like putting information out there and putting out like you know, speaking truth, as like so much of the internet and you know, is like increasingly getting either censored for marginalized folks or just like, you know, rendered inaccessible, you know, for you know, folks like sex workers and stuff like that. So I was just would love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
So just to clarify, the question is like, what are our thoughts on like the relationship between like zines and the workers' pamphlet?
Yeah, and like, you know, as like specifically getting information out there that maybe otherwise wouldn't be accessible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to take a minute to think about this one. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like pressure within just like print media in general for like the printed word to like be an informative thing. Like you're only making a book or a pamphlet or a zine because something useful and informative needs to go into it, right? And that's like how we understand like book making, like in general. And then, you know, it's like the seriousness of like book making, and then there's like on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have what might be considered like book arts, which is like you know, making books not necessarily for the purpose of like informing or containing like knowledge or information, but for exploring the aesthetic kind of like form of the book and letting that speak for itself. And then somewhere in the middle, you have a zine, which is like very much so something that can contain information. Some of that information might be important historical information. It might be urgent movement information. It might be urgent identity information, personal narratives. Or it might not. It might just be comics. It might be silly jokes. It might be a list of like all the people who've slighted you in high school. Just like everything that you hate in the world. Like,
yeah.
It kind of like spans this like range of like really useful information to like, you know, kind of like frivolous or so-called unnecessary information that somebody themselves like feels that it's important to like create a publication and share it with other people. So I think that, you know, I'm somewhere also in the middle of this spectrum. Like, I think that as somebody who is in community with other people, who exists in this society and feels the sense of urgency around movement building and any kind of technologies, and zines themselves are also technologies that can be tools for liberation. I think that those tools should be informative and should help people liberate themselves and other people's. But I also think a really important aspect of like our liberation is like not being so tied to like the seriousness and the informative and oversaturating and inundating ourselves with like what you were saying earlier, like what is my relationship to the news and what is my relationship to information, and like having access to too much information can have like detrimental effects. And so I think that I'm really interested in zines as a medium that really play between the spectrum of like information and also just like play and leisure and silliness and like satire and like humor, and that it's a space for all of those things to kind of like coexist and interact with each other. And so I think that it's important to acknowledge like the kind of duality of zines, and that you can't really have one without the other, that we can't play unless, you know, we acknowledge that the context from which we're playing from is very much so mired in like, you know, a lot of strife and like a lot of oppression, a lot of political distress, and like people are just like not well generally, you know, and especially in the context of like a pandemic. Like, I think it's important to acknowledge those things, but it's also important to have healthy ways of like coping with those things with like entertainment and like satire and jokes and joy and all of these like beautiful aesthetic things that are necessary. And I think that is within the spirit of like this, like the workers pamphlet, you know, like workers were, you know, people like Ida B. Wells, who you mentioned, and other sort of like pamphleteers, and some of the early kind of like zine predecessors of, you know, little magazines from the Harlem Renaissance. And you know, we had all of these like community newspapers, you know, above ground, underground, like community newspapers from 1960s and 70s and like 80s counterculture in like the US and also like the UK and other countries, you know, like the Black Panther Party newspaper was one of those that comes to mind. I think that there were elements of that kind of like play and seriousness in the kind of iconography and like comics in that newspaper, but also it was very much so tied to like liberation as well. And yeah, just like thinking about like how in our movements we can still maintain that kind of like balance between, you know, the informative with also like, you know, to capture the hearts and be in community with other people, we also have to be yeah, I don't know, just we have to be effective. We have to be like emotionally like complex beings that aren't just like you know, stoic and like serious all the time. Like that's the way that I'm thinking about it now. I'm sure other things will come to mind, but yeah, I think there's like this like balancing act that's happening within the informative and like the, I guess, the more playful.
Yeah, we gotta not burn ourselves out. That's so real. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like just as like with the Donna Haraway, like the playful, and then but then informative, which I'm gonna which I found like what I also like about zines. That's like reminds me of the quote that you read from Survive and Punish, which is like another world is possible. Like you hear it, and like this book is about healthcare and how in Chiapas and Rojava and like different autonomous zones they do it. Like, you know, they make it happen. So I think I think for me, zines are these like stories. I don't want to say stories because it's reality, but stories of how people are making the world that we want. And I think a lot of the times in communication and like, a lot of filter and again, a relationship to what we consume and use. And back then, you had newspapers and things were, who controlled the newspapers. Now you have social media. So like information for the masses have kind of sort of been filtered, kind of. Maybe now it's more insidious because it's more very precise perhaps, but like I think with zines it's like the folks can talk to each other without sort of having that filter, and I think then and then the question becomes how then can we just like make it more accessible so that where the folks are, the zines are there too. So then there's like this, and I think what's wonderful with zines is there can be responses to it which don't need to be like this, like you don't need to put out a whole new book to respond to it, right? Like you're like you can put out like a nice like response, and it can be like this sort of nice engaging thing, and like especially with sex workers, and like I think their narratives right now they also get very filtered out and sort of censored, and I think zines are a great way for them to talk about their realities and like and like it doesn't have to be serious, right? Like can talk about the incidents that happen, and I think just like I think they're a great way to like see the world, what the world could be, and how the world is, and we just don't see it because what we can what masses consume on regularly, it's not in their interest to show it to us. So like the fight, like it's like healthcare that's been provided in all these autonomous, and it's like it's like great, like they're doing it, so we can do it. And I think the scope of imagination has like really narrowed, and I think zines kind of like sort of push back against it. It's like hey,
let's take a look.
It's very informative. This is like the more informative side, but
this is a thick zine. It's like it's really pushing the bounds of like how many papers you can stack together. It's very hefty. It is fighting like hell to stay together, but fight like hell for the living, a health autonomy reader. It looks like it's a publication by Woodbine, and there's two quotes here on this page that say "Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living" by Mother Jones, and another one that says "They tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds" by a Mexican proverb. And there's just like the table of contents says it's there's like towards health autonomy, and then autonomous healthcare, and then various cities: Chicago, the Bronx, Chiapas, Rojava, and Greece. And then creating the irreversible. So it's definitely like a kind of what would you call it? Like a it's not really futurism. It's kind of like a presentism of what's happening now within healthcare, but also perhaps maybe speculation involved in what would it take to like necessitate this now that they're in this book. So in this scene. So. Really glad that you. Oh wow, that's gorgeous.
Oh, so cool.
Really glad that you brought this to share with us.
In some regions like Rojava and Chiapas, it's like they do it. It's a reality. It's like the status quo where they're able to like offer these basic things, health. Like everyone should have access to healthcare, and how and then it's like okay, we all agree on that. How do we do it? What are we going to do? So it's like, it's really nice to see that, they're doing it. And what are the things they consider? And then going back to like, what do we have? And then what do we need? And then also it's just like, going back to the Miriam Kaba quote, like it gives me hope. Like, I would not despair at all.
Yeah, I want to read this paragraph from the Chiapas section that says, "This article is based on information provided by a compa who has been working to train health promoters in 2 different areas of Chiapas. He stressed that he could only discuss healthcare in 2 of the 5 caracoles, the self-governing geographical regions into which Zapatista territory is divided. Each caracol is autonomous. They all start from the same idea, land and freedom, but each area has developed distinctly with a different program and a different way of doing things." Hopefully. Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think, Joan. Like, how would you answer your own question?
Oh goodness. Well, y'all both gave very cool answers, and I feel like thinking about because you touched on it, sort of zines being, very much in the middle there, and thinking about like how, the kind of nonsensical and sort of just like, matter of fact stuff, like I feel like often informs what, the informative stuff and vice versa, right?
Mhm.
Where you have stuff where like, say her name is like in practice just a bunch of stories from, a cartoonist's life, but they're like speaking about being a queer Black person in the world. And like that is in turn informing other people's experiences and what other people are making. And, I think that is a really cool, it's the whole practice behind stuff like, emergent strategy and like, using speculative fiction as a model for like what we want to see in the world and those kinds of futures, right? Like, I think that's so much of the kind of space that zines reside in, where like, it's the silliness and the, weirdness that are informing the movement work, which is informing the, autobio work, which, feeds into itself. And it's just, yeah, it's a cool space to be in.
Yeah, it's all connected. Yeah, I love that. Wow. I'm curious if you have any questions, Jay, or are there any other questions that like I haven't asked today that we'd be interested in exploring?
I guess I would be interested in like the zine ecosystem. Like, yeah, I mean, this is just like, how we make it more accessible for folks. And, the Interference Archives, it's amazing. It's not really a question, just musing about, the accessibility of zines. And then going back to like, I feel like we're still dealing with the internet and social media, and then how that plays into like, because like that's another way that people also share, right? Like, but it's we don't call it a zine because it's but then I guess just like relationship between the ability to share, but then it also gets filtered out. But yeah, I guess the zines where it's just like uncompromising, it's there, and then just like making it accessible. These are just musings. I have no questions.
I think it's an interesting thing to think about, is like, what is a zine, in today's sort of like digital context? We have social media platforms that, there's like zine-like elements of like sharing your ideas and, kind of like wave insight into somebody's personal narrative and experience in the way that you might, post something on Instagram or like post something on Twitter or like, write a microblog on some other platform or, a short TikTok or something like that. Like, I think there are these kinds of like elements that are, borrowed from zines. They share, there's a language and a kind of maybe even an ethos that's shared with zines in the way that people who are in similar communities that make zines, in similar movements that engage in zines, also engage in social media posts and like sharing, and like it's another tool, it's another way of getting information out there. But again, it's not quite a zine, right? It's not a zine, it's something else entirely. And so I'm curious, like, for myself personally, like what is the next iteration of zines? Like, are zines always going to be this physical medium that we're just always going to touch and interact with in an archive? Is that the necessary like core element of zines? And then there's like a lot of like, I think there's a few new zines out there that are like online only, like they're strictly like on platforms like Substack, which are like kind of like newsletter subscription services, like Substack zines. You have email only zines, which has always been an element of the zine community, but email only zines are coming back. You have web zines coming back, people who are like creating websites specifically just to be operating in similar functions or in different functions than physical, tangible like zines. I'm curious, like, if you've interacted with some of those, and like what your thoughts on, like, this kind of like physical, tangible zine medium, and then this like more digital, virtual kind of like zine.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, especially after running a whole event, because one of the
comic stuff.
and one of the things that we sort of differentiated that we decided on, because we didn't want to put the labor on the folks selling stuff, and we wanted to make stuff more, I guess, accessible. So we only sold stuff that was online, so that you could basically buy as much of it as you want. And it's an interesting question, right? Because it raises the point, like, you could, in theory, buy all of these as like, or make all of these into like PDFs and then put them out there, right? And it's like, is it still a zine if you're sending it on the internet, when there's like, if it was made physically first and then made into a PDF, like, are both of those still zines if it was online first and then printed, like, which is it? It's, I don't know if I have an answer for that, but I think it's really interesting to think about. And, especially as we're going into, exactly like stuff that is like online only, or, specifically over email. I think they're really interesting questions to consider, because on the one hand, they're more accessible, but they're also, there's, I think there's a certain level of ephemera that you understandably lose when you don't hold it physically. I think we're I guess because we run a bookstore, we're maybe a little bit biased in that sense. Not that I don't love reading stuff online too, but like I don't know. And especially like, as it relates to like texture and things that you can only do physically, like, you can see how something was printed online, but there are parts of that you can't experience physically if you're not holding it, right? Like if something was risographed, or if something is like, like a multimedia piece with like different kinds of like, there's an artist that we hosted, Felipa Estrella, that does stuff with like felt and stuff like that on their zines and stuff. And so like, like
tactility is like a really core
element, like multimedia pieces like that, right? Where it's like a, unique experience that, you can see that physically, or you can see that, on your screen, right? But like, you're not experiencing that if you're not holding it physically.
And even if you were to reprint that felt zine, you completely flatten, that texture when you reproduce it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting question to think about. Yeah. When it's like, accessibility versus the experience, right? Like, I think one doesn't necessarily benefit the other, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's, depends on what it's for.
Yeah, I think for them, it doesn't have to be like one or the other, but I think the accessibility, and then at the same time, when someone is being personal on the platform matters, right? Like if someone's being, and it's sex worker talking about their experiences on Instagram, they're gonna get like censored or whatever. So that's sort of that's why it's like, great, you know what, we have a print scene, we're just going to pass it on, or like with Comic Fest, or like other, or email newsletter, if there's a way to bypass where we can maintain this like unfiltered sort of thing, then it's like cool, like that's great. I mean, my personal view, like, it's accessibility. I think a lot of the they just want to like share.
Yeah, there's this idea that like once a platform is out of one's control, you know, that you lose a level of like autonomy, you know, like you're subject to Instagram's programmers and like their algorithms and, you know, their censorship, their sort of like community, sort of so-called community, you know, guidelines. And same thing for Twitter and, you know, same thing for TikTok. And we all know that those platforms and their guidelines tend to be discriminatory against people who are sex workers, people who are queer, people who are trans, people who speak out against the state, anybody who's essentially, you know, dissenting from any kind of like mainstream kind of thought is going to be subject to a kind of the coercive, you know, guidelines of that platform and conform their ideas to that platform. But things like a zine or things like an email, even email is not necessarily, you know, free if you're like free and clear from those kinds of like censorship laws if you're working with platforms like Gmail and you know, and other, you know, sort of like I guess like monopolized email servers and things like that. Like you could be censored on those platforms as well. But when you own the kind of means, you know, by which like you're spreading information, you face less of those challenges. And so I think that that's a very key point, that like you can always defer to printing and doing something yourself, sharing your own information and not being reliant on any kind of platform will always be necessary, regardless of what time that we're in. And I'm curious like how people will start to take control or build their own, you know, dissenting platforms in a similar kind of fashion as like making their own zines. Like, will someone make their own Instagram, you know, or will someone make their own Twitter? That would be amazing. And there was something else I wanted to say on this topic, and it's slipping slipping my mind right now. I hope that it comes back because I really wanted to say it. Yeah, trying to ponder and think. But this is I'm really enjoying musing over these things with you, because I think that like we don't I found the thought. It's back. Hey. So I think that that's what's kind of cool about zines, right? That there's like, while there is this kind of like definition of what a zine is, like we kind of explored it earlier, it's kind of intentionally loose. Like people determine what a zine is. Like I don't think anybody who's invested in and cares about the zine making community is interested in gatekeeping the definition. Like it's not about like, oh, let's all line up and determine if this thing is a zine or not. Like I don't think anybody who makes zines is like interested in that. And so I'm curious to see like who is going to expand this like definition of a zine, right? Like what is the digital zine? Like what are the characteristics of like a digital or like a virtual zine, and how will that, you know, parallel or completely like challenge the notions of what like a tangible, like physical world, like real world zine is, right? Like I think that there's a place for zines in the virtual, and there's a place for zines to exist like outside of like our material world. But it just is it's an unknown, you know, like people are defining it and like figuring it out right now. And, you know, even though this is a new type of like print media and it's very early in its stages, like in this stage, but in the digital kind of stage, it's very, very young, and it'll be interesting to see what it's like in the next 5 years or the next 10 years. Yeah. Wow. Any kind of last comments or words on this subject?
I feel like we got it all out there.
Okay.
There's nothing left to say.
There's nothing left to say on digital virtual zines, to be continued in the future, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I will say, I think there are some folks working on, maybe they'll have something, but where we can own our own data. And then, like, you know, I think with physical zines, what's really wonderful is like, hey, here you go, read this.
Yeah.
And you can exchange. I think, like, you know, it gets like passed around. And I think similarly, if we can have that sort of ability to like freely just like pass it around, which I hope in 5 to 10 years, we find ways to design our system so that we are able to not have these middle persons sort of profit off exchange, which we should just be freely able to do.
Totally heard that. Yeah. That being said, are there any sort of like collectives or groups or people or movements that you'd like to shout out to before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I think the folks in Woodbine and Mundos in Ridgewood, I think they're doing amazing mutual aid work. Like they have a whole ecosystem, and it's just like, trying to learn from them. And then also the Parents Archives. Thank you, thank you for this space. It's just like a little sacred space. And Survived and Punished. Because
yes, shout out to Survived and Punished.
And my mind is blanking. So
yeah. So many very cool folks. I think we talked about the folks from Gender Fail earlier are making some really cool stuff. Very cool zines that are very wonderful. I really like the folks over at Black Jose Press that are doing like cool queer Black comics right now. That stuff is very rad. The folks, oh gosh, yeah, it's all going away
in this moment.
Yeah,
you forget, and then as soon as you walk away, you'll be like, I forgot this person. Person.
It'll be like as I'm going to sleep tonight. It's like now I remember. I guess the folks at Diskette, Carta, and those folks who put out really amazing comics and zines and stuff. Also, definitely, if folks like Napkin would definitely, I think they'll like all the other cool queer and trans stuff there.
Oh, I also want to just give a shout out to Common Notions. I like the stuff. I love the stuff they're putting out. So.
Yes.
Yeah, they're so cool.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I'd like to shout out Project Nia and Brown Recluse Zine Distro, and all the folks at Bluestockings. I'm so glad that you could join us today for this first event of its kind. I think After Sass is very much so still experimental, and we're so happy to have inaugurated it with two wonderful and brilliant folks such as yourselves. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Be sure to check out Booklyn's website for more After Sass programming later in June. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.